Hey, well, welcome to another Move Early, Move Often chat. I am Blake Martin, and with me is Thomas Karakolis, the fabulous Dr. Thomas Karakolis. How you doing, Thomas?
Not bad. What's going on, Blake?
Not too much. Last week we were talking about bone remodeling and how bones, uh, depending on the activity you're doing, and some of it is age based, how they change and stuff like that. And I kind of a thing that I thought we might get to talk about a little bit more was this idea of how our system adjusts to what we ask it to do. This idea that we kind of ask it to do stuff, and it'll do it eventually. It takes a while sometimes for our bodies to either learn the skill or to get strong enough or to get have enough mobility. But in general, you push it in that direction slowly and cautiously and thoughtfully, and your body catches up with what you're trying to get it to do.
Exactly.
So let's talk about that a little bit. The I'm going to throw up this slide here just for a second, and I know you can't see it. You're just going to have to trust me.
I'll
Um,
imagine it.
Imagine it in your head. It says the SAID principle, and the first word is specific adaptation, imposed demand. Specific adaptation to imposed demand is the SAID principle. Tell me a little bit about that from your perspective, Thomas.
The basic idea is that somehow our bones can sense the mechanical demands that are being placed on them and they'll adapt accordingly. So, carrying around extra bone is obviously energetically inefficient. So, we don't want to just have big, bulky, heavy bones that we're carrying around because it'd be unnecessary. So our bones try and find this optimal um, design, which includes the shape and structure of them as well as the composition or the mass of them, and they want to be as optimized for the requirements that they're needed for, and so they do that by essentially it's almost like you described it, like they're learning what we normally do, and then they adapt based off of the normal demand that we put on.
And then I would add from a neuromuscular perspective that exactly the same thing happens neuromuscularly. That if you don't need to do a certain pattern, or if you don't need to carry a certain amount of weight, your muscles are just not going to. You're not going to get huge. You're not just going to walk around looking like Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Exactly.
Or The Rock. Just you're not just going to walk around being huge. It's not until you start demanding your system do that, or like you're not going to have those ninja-like reflexes. Well, maybe you're not, but I may have ninja-like reflexes. No, one is not going to have ninja-like reflexes unless you specifically do activities that push your body in that direction.
Yeah, it's important to never forget though that there is a certain genetic component to this. So
Yeah.
I may never look like The Rock, but you might. In all honesty, like depending on how many demands you impose on your body.
Like growing another 2 feet, like that would be
Oh
one
no,
of the
he's
and
not 2 feet taller than
and
me.
I'd have to add some Samoanness to my whole thing to get rock like, but and much huger too. I'd have to increase the hugeness, but yeah. Yeah, if I yes, there is a genetic component, and it's true. There are certain people who bulk up really naturally. Their muscles grow, or they do tend to have bone structure that is, like maybe thicker through one of the bones, one of the long bones of the body or something like that, right?
Exactly. So I think the key to this entire conversation is throughout a lifetime, we have different phases, obviously. So when we're young and we're growing, our bones really naturally, and our muscles, and like all of our soft tissue, essentially, it gets bigger and stronger quite easily because it's anticipating this growth phase to when it reaches maturity, and then it's doing what it's supposed to do for the rest of your life, however long that life is. But as we age, we end up losing a lot of this tissue, including our muscles.
Yeah.
They atrophy our bones, end up losing bone mineral density, and the ultimate effect could be potentially being osteoporotic or having osteoporosis, and that's something that we're really trying to avoid throughout our lifetimes.
So osteoporosis, the big idea with osteoporosis is that there's this kind of this structure of the bone, and it's kind of jam packed full of like minerals and live tissue and stuff like that. But you lose parts of that, right?
Yeah, so what happens is through our natural aging, especially our long bones, let's use them as an example, they end up having a diameter that ends up getting bigger and bigger. Um, Maybe not noticeably and not that dramatically, but that's what happens. So you end up like if you have like a circular cross-sectional piece that's hollowed out in the middle, like let's say a tube. And if that tube gets bigger, it actually doesn't have to be as thick so that it
Right,
can resist bending and other forces that is put on it. So our bones naturally do that, and then as a compensation, they end up taking bone mineral density away. The problem is with some people, a lot of people, you end up having too much of that bone mineral density resorb back into your body, and you end up having bones that end up being weaker as you age, and that's what causes like spontaneous fracture from people that have
right,
osteoporosis.
right. So this specific adaptation to impose demand, when I think about it with respect to muscle, what I'm thinking about is if I progressively add more weight, when I'm younger and healthy, if I add more weight, that eventually I'll be able to lift more. So uh, if this week I can lift, 100 pounds 6 times in 3 sets, then next week I might be able to try 110. But if I can't lift even 90 this week, then there's no way I should jump up. I shouldn't have this. I haven't. And if I don't ask my body to do anything, I also can't jump. I've got to have this specific. The muscles have got to grow a little bit, and then there's got to be this demand has to be imposed on the body to change it. But is it the same thing with bones, where the bones, if you're asking them to bear weight, that they'll continue to bear weight, or is it a little different than that?
It's very similar. So a good example for that is looking at astronauts coming back from outer space, and because they're in a zero gravity environment, as much as they try to maintain loads by exercise on their body and using like weights, or sorry, against weights, but using like straps and resistance and stuff like that to maintain their strength, both of their muscles and their bones. Their muscles do ultimately end up atrophying to a certain extent, and
Yeah,
they lose quite a bit of bone mineral density. So when an astronaut returns, they actually have the bones of someone that's a lot older than them. And luckily, they're able to regain a lot of that bone mineral density as they spend more time back on Earth. But it's the same idea. So people who are bedridden or uh, chronically sedentary, they'll generally tend to lose bone mineral density faster and more dramatically than somebody who remains active throughout their entire lifetime.
so this activity relationship, kind of this healthy amount of loading, a specific um, adaptation, we need to have a demand, impose a demand that is sufficient but not too much. So, do you think that is there kind of a magic way of saying how much activity should I do? Is there any activity that's too much, like especially for aging people?
There's obviously too much activity. That's usually how we get injured. So we're trying to avoid getting injury. But in terms of a magical amount, no. There's so much biovariability and biodiversity that the amount of, let's say, running a person can do. One person can go out and run 10 kilometers fairly easily, let's say, and another person, it would take them months, if not years, of training to be able to do that. Same with weightlifting, for example. I probably wouldn't lift the same weight that you would lift if we were doing strength training. So there's no magical amount, but the key is to always make sure you're pushing yourself a little bit, but don't push yourself too much to the point where you're going to hurt yourself.
Right.
And so this is where kinesiologists and strength conditioning coaches and professionals that can help if you're finding it difficult to do it on your own. And this is some of the stuff that you do during the memo daily activity sessions, which I think are great, Blake, is that you give a lot of different options to people so that they can start where they're comfortable,
Yeah.
and then they can try and build up and do their own progression so that they can eventually become stronger, or depending on where they are in their aging life cycle, they can just sometimes you just want to maintain, especially
Right.
if I'm in my 80s, I'm probably happy to maintain strength from like my 80th birthday to my 90th birthday. I might not be looking to carry more weight or
Right.
add more bone mineral density.
Right. So there's this whole delicate balance of how much activity, but it's dependent on who you are and kind of where you are in your life cycle and life cycle. Talking about people like their computer parts. Got to do the life cycle management. But
Yeah, yeah.
and there's this osteoporosis factor. There's a slide that I sometimes use with kinesiology students, and it shows that the mineral dense there's an organic component to bones and an organic component. And when you're a child, the it's mineral to organic is 1 to 1. When you're an adult, the mineral to organic is 4 to 1. So you have more mineral and less organic still. But when you're elderly, like in the aged, the ratio is more like 7 to 1, 7 mineral to 1 organic. So I think we're also seeing this diminishment of the organic aspect of the bone. So it's also losing its elasticity and some of its natural, rebound and give, which is why it's really important to, be conscientious of hydration for one, to make sure that what that we're getting good movement close to the bone of like fluids and stuff like that, and also taking care to um, not do as many contact sports. I think like fewer you know fewer um, parkour jumps from high heights.
Yeah, yeah. And I think this is really important given the present day context that we're living in right now, where I think a lot of people's activity levels have dropped. And there's a whole bunch of things that I'm personally worried about in terms of how we come back from all of this, and what our lives look like post pandemic.
Right.
And if we don't have that same level of activity that we had pre pandemic, which arguably wasn't enough either. Like I think we all would like to be more active, and we could encourage everyone else to be more
Sure.
active as well. But what happens 10, 15, 20 years down the road if we have some long-term residual effects from the actions that we
Yeah. Agreed.
acutely took over the past year now, let's say?
Yeah.
Are we going to have more people that have osteoporosis? Are we going to end up having shorter lifespans because we're all on our computers, Zooming and MS Teamsing and what have you, rather than
MS
walking?
Teamsing, is that the verb form of MS Teams?
Uh,
Um,
I'm using it, man.
so um, I I think that's a really good point. Like looking down the road and anticipating what are possible outcomes. So the whole thing, the specific adaptation to impose demand, there's some important things that I want to know. I'm going to throw up the little slide again. And the principle is that your body will adapt specifically to what demands you place on it. So if you only demand that it sit in a chair, it's going to get better at sitting in a chair. If you only demand that it lay on the floor, it's going to get better at that. And your body will get better at being sedentary if you're sedentary, and it will be less efficient and less, again, the word efficiency is kind of weird, but it will become less adept at doing other things. So we need to progressively and thoughtfully apply a demand on our body to do different things, whether it be stepping from side to side or stepping backwards into our backward space, or supporting our weight on our hands and knees so that we're getting weight into our shoulders to avoid osteoporosis in our upper limb and our shoulder girdle, like just being cautious of that, and applying a little more resistance to our muscles, maybe through doing longer duration exercise or exercise with resistant bands or with weights. things that we can do like that. So the big idea is to combat all of this by specifically demanding that our body do a little bit more, but we do this progressively.
That's a perfect way to sum this all up. Like I think that was a great
I was
great way to sum
trying.
it up.
I was trying to sum it all up.
I liked it. I thought it was fantastic. Now we just got to figure out what we're going to talk about next week.
Well, what I've got to do is I've got to find the end button.
Yeah, this will be posted to the YouTube channel after
Oh
the
yeah,
one
that's
from.
true.
Okay,
That's true.
perfect.
But
Yeah,
if I might find it, we'll see. We'll
excellent.
see.
All right, I'll see you next week, Blake.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Thomas. Great
Bye.
conversation.